I really want to thank Jim for the invitation to come and speak this morning. It's really my pleasure to come and speak to Ripon's retreat, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity. What I'd like to do is maybe give you some formal remarks, take about 10 minutes, and then open it up for questions. Any questions you might have for me, and you can, they can come from a range of different subjects, from last week's Super Bowl to politics, or talk about wireless if you want to. And then I'll introduce our next speaker after that, okay? In asking me to speak this morning, Jim asked me to share with you some of the lessons I've learned on both the football field as well as on Capitol Hill, and how some of my experiences might translate into how congressional Republicans can deal with some challenges that face the nation today. And Jim, I agreed to speak before I really considered what a tall order that was. But here I am, so I'm going to give it a try. Let me start with an old coach's admonition that goes, discipline is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. Winning an election, winning an amendment, getting a bill signed into law, that's the fun stuff, right? It's like catching passes or scoring touchdowns. You ask people if they want to do that, they say, sure, I'll sign up for that anytime. But none of that stuff can happen without a lot of inglorious, hard, sometimes unappealing work. Most people won't see it, and it's not always fun, but it matters. It really matters. It's what makes the difference between winning and losing. Whether you're an athlete lifting weights, running stadium steps in the summer heat, or foregoing a dessert you might like to eat, or you're a member of Congress or a staff member answering mail, returning calls, or tending to an absolutely overflowing inbox, as I know you often do, it's the hard work when no one's looking, and often when you think there are more fun ways to spend your time. It's that work that pays off at crunch time. If you want to meet your goals in sports or in politics, you've got to put in the work. Well, the second thing I think that's important in your work, the folks on the other side are your opponents, not your enemies. They're your opponents, not your enemies. Sometimes this is really, really hard to remember, and I know that. I can assure you that it certainly wasn't easy to remember that when I was playing for the Seahawks, and we had the Raiders in our division. Those guys were nasty and easy to dislike, but even in great hard-fought rivalries, it was important to remember, most of the time anyway, that the guys across the line were just like me, playing hard and trying to win. That's true here too, except that no one in Congress has ever tried to poke me in the eyes on the bottom of a pile after a tackle, and they did in Oakland. I know that the people who are attracted to politics are a passionate bunch, and that's a good thing because passion can take you far. But unbridled, it can also lead you astray. It can lead you to places that you wish later you hadn't gone. The other team may be wrong some of the time, maybe even all of the time, but I found that it really helped to get to know them. And I can't emphasize that enough, to get to know them. And I made and have kept some great across-the-aisle friendships, not relationships, but friendships. That is much harder to do if you let the differences of opinion become personal. So don't. Win without hate. And I would just underscore that. Win without hating the other side. Third, don't showboat. The great Bear Bryant, for those of you too young to remember him, he was the legendary coach at the University of Alabama. Coach Bryant used to say to his players, when you get in the end zone, act like you've been there before. And we had a coach in Seattle that used to say, act like you've been there before and that you're going to come back. When you have success, be happy, but proud privately. But don't draw attention to yourself. Don't draw too much attention to yourself or your boss. The reality is that we Republicans are a pretty buttoned-down group, and most of us look just plain silly doing a touchdown dance anyway. The fourth lesson from football that also applies in politics is, and this is really important, have fun. Have fun at your job. You're blessed to have a wonderful and unique opportunity to work in one of America's truly special places and one of the world's most remarkable institutions. Value that. Appreciate it. Take the time to look up at the Capitol Dome. I can remember doing that many times, walking over to a vote at midnight And just looking at the dome lit up, and it really sparked something inside of me that was really powerful. But it was a deep sense of commitment and love for our country. But take the time to look up at that dome and imagine all the people who've come before you. And if you ever get so jaded that you cease to marvel at the wonder of this system that the founders created, know that it's time to go. If it's not fun, if it's not special, if you're not doing it for the right reasons, stop. Because we need people in government who are here for the right reasons. You have to be willing to serve. Finally, I guess if there's one piece of advice I could pass along to you, it would be this. Always remember to keep things in perspective. It's true in football, it's true in politics, and it's true in life. Remember what's important. Things like relationships and personal integrity. Those are things that are really important. And remember that there will be good days and bad days. And to that end, Jim asked me recently to write an essay for the Ripon Forum about the late Jack Kemp. And one of the stories I recounted is a piece of advice he had for me during one of the more challenging moments in my congressional career. It was the late 1990s, and I had run for the House Majority Leader, really to try to send a signal to the current Majority Leader, Dick Armey, that we were not pleased with the direction that the House was taking in general. I had run for the House Majority Leader and lost, and I bumped into Jack Kemp one day later. And perhaps sensing a more disappointment than I was willing to let on, Jack ended our conversation by quoting one of my favorite historical figures, Winston Churchill. He told me, "Steve, I want you to remember that success is not final, failure is not fatal, but it's the courage to continue that counts." Courage to continue. Those words have stuck with me since that time. Nearly 15 years later, amid the political dysfunction we read about and the economic uncertainty we see every day, they are words that I believe are relevant to each and every person in this room. So I would just want to offer that encouragement to you and tell you what a great job I think you have in the House and in the Senate, and just to enjoy it. Have fun. And if it's not fun, you need to start looking for something else because it should be. So with that, that's my comments. I'm glad to take any questions you guys might have right now before I introduce the next speaker. Have you had enough coffee and donuts to get your mind working yet? I know how that is. Did you guys watch the Super Bowl? Yes, sir.
How do you think Washington has changed since you were in
I think the two sides have gotten further apart, not closer together. You know, they always used to tell me in '94, after we were elected in the election in '94, that Washington started growing apart. But you know what? I think that's probably true. But my response to that is it probably grew apart because for the 40 years before that, it was one-party rule, and it was a majority that was unbeatable. So it was a lot easier for Republicans and Democrats to get along then because Republicans knew all they had to do is show up and vote no about everything, and Democrats show up and vote yes about everything, and it didn't matter what the other side said because the Democrats knew they were always going to win. And so it made for a real happy bunch. But when that election created the scenario where the sides were much more close in terms of the numbers that we had, it got a lot more contentious, and it's continued to this day. And I think it's only because the elections have gotten a lot closer and the numbers in the House have gotten a lot closer as well. So I don't view that as necessarily a negative thing, but it's just been a result of having elections that have drawn districts that have meant that it's a more balanced Congress than there was in the past. So that would be one big difference. Another difference is all the ethics rules that are in place today. We didn't have those back when I was in Congress. And, you know, it's not that we did a lot of unethical things, but we just didn't have to report, you know, going to dinner with somebody or all that kind of stuff. And so I personally don't think that's a great thing. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you could reflect back on when you were serving in Congress and to this group really talk about what you remember as being the most effective ledge director or communications staffer that you had, and things that you might have, a bit of advice you might have heard from a very practical member to staffer.
Yep. Well, I had several people work for me over the course of 7 years, and some were very, very effective and some weren't. But the people that I respected the most were people that were willing to offer me their candid, honest opinion, even if they felt like it was going against what they thought I would say. They gave me their opinion about and their position on the particular issue. And not only that, but before they even dared to come tell me what they thought about the legislation or the effort, they spent the time to educate themselves about this particular issue, whatever it was. So that's what I really appreciated about my staff when they came to me, is one, I knew that they were prepared, they knew the subject forwards and backwards, they knew where people were on this particular issue and could relate that to me. They could tell me where people were, where they were, what the issue was, and how they felt like that impacted our country. They gave me their honest opinion. They didn't tell me where I needed to be as a result of their opinion, but they gave me their honest opinion, even if they felt like it might be going against what I might believe. And I always appreciated that. Particularly, I think I really appreciated people that were strong enough in their own character and sense of who they were, that they were willing to offer me their candid, honest opinion. And then at that point, I had to make a decision about which direction I went on any piece of legislation or issue that was before me. But I always respected those members of my staff who were willing to give me their honest and educated opinion about the issues. So I think that's really important for staff people to know that that members really do appreciate their staff who have the courage to say, you know, this is what I think about this. I've done this research, I've done this homework, and this is what I think about this issue. And then, you know, as a staff person, you let it go from there, because it's not your job to make up the member's mind. It's his job to make up his mind. But it's your job to give him the facts as you see them, and then move forward. And so I think that's really important for us, because I think sometimes staff comes to Washington, and sometimes you can get intimidated by the situation or by the member himself. Sometimes members aren't real friendly, but I think ultimately those members of Congress really appreciate members who have the backbone to stand up and say, you know, this is what I believe. You can vote how you want, but this is where I come down on this issue because of these 5 reasons. Yes, ma'am.
I wondered if you could comment a little bit on this particular freshman class, because there are probably a number of folks that didn't work as freshman members, and what you see their role what you think their role is going to be going forward in promoting the GOP agenda as a whole.
That's a good question, and I would tell you from my perspective, and that's coming in '94 when Republicans hadn't been in the majority for 40 years. It was literally back in 1954, I think, when the last time Republicans were in the majority, until 1994. And I can remember getting the distinct impression, if not being told verbatim, that a freshman's place is to be in the back of the room, watch and listen the senior members, and follow our lead. And I can tell you that, and if you're from a leader's office, I apologize for this, but I think that's exactly the wrong thing to do. The people who elected you to office aren't sitting in that room over there in, what is it, H5 or whatever it is down there where they have their meetings. The people who elected you are at home, and they've sent you here to do a job, and you've made certain promises and commitments to them when you ran for office, and you need to fulfill them and do them any way and every way that you can. And I don't think being a backbencher is how you fulfill an agenda that you've promised to your constituents at home. You got to be up front, you got to lead, you have to form coalitions, you have to force votes in committee and on the floor. You have to continue to pressure your leadership to say, these are the issues that are important to my constituents, how do I get them done, and be a force to be reckoned with. And don't feel like that you have to be a silent member sitting in the back of the room until you figure out what's going on. I mean, literally, I came to Washington in 1994. I got a C in political science. I took one political science class. I was standing in front of the Capitol doing the first interview I ever did in Washington, D.C. with the reporter from my hometown paper, and kept referring to the Capitol as the White House. Now, I mean, I was not, I'm not a stupid guy. It was just a mistake. And, but literally it showed him and me how little time I'd actually spent in Washington, D.C. And I think that's the reason I was elected, because I said, I want to bring some common sense to Washington. And so you can't do that being one of the members of the, the silent members in the back of the room. You got to step up your game, and so that's what I would say. Yes, sir.
As employers, we work hard to attract and retain top talent. And when you were serving, I suspect you were a lot more popular than those who serve today. What's going on with the low approval rating? Is it deserved? And what does it mean for coming to work on Capitol Hill? And how do you get out of that cycle?
I wish I had an answer for you. I really don't. I see what's going on, and I read about it. I hear about it. I listen to my wife, and she's complaining about it. And I know that 95% of the criticism that's aimed at Congress comes from a sense of frustration with everything that's going on in life and in our world and our country. So some of it I discount for that reason, but there is a sense that the partisanship and the bickering has reached a new level, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but that's certainly the opinion that's held by a majority of Americans, and I don't know how you get out of this box, because I mean, I'd like to say, well, we got to have a bipartisan effort to legislation and all that sort of stuff, and that's not the system of government that our founding fathers established in this country. If you look back through the years, I'm talking hundreds of years, there's always been partisan bickering. There's always been deep, heated emotion involved. There's been people shot in the Capitol over legislation and differences of opinion. Now, I haven't seen anybody shot in the Capitol in a long time. But there's always been passionate people in Washington, D.C. That are willing to stand up for what they believe. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's bad. So I guess I'm puzzled too as to what you do then, because you've got this public animus out there that is distasteful, but at the same time, the partisan bickering, I think, is a healthy thing for our system of government. If you can get to the point that you're actually doing something. I think when the partisanship leads to dysfunction, and I would say dysfunction is when you have a budget that hasn't been passed in 1,000 days, that's a problem. And I don't know how you fix that, but that's definitely a problem. And I think that things like that lead to the frustration that's in the public today. Yes, sir.
What was it like to serve under Speaker Gingrich? A lot of stuff in the news the last few months. I wonder if you had any good stories.
About Newt? I have many stories. Let me just put it this way. I like Newt Gingrich. I really do. I like him as a person. I think he's an excellent speaker, small s, and he's very motivational, and does a great job. There was. I'll tell you the most famous story that you've probably even heard before, because somebody's written. Actually, Joe Scarborough wrote about it a couple of weeks ago. We had a vote in Congress. This was probably in '98 or '99, something like that. So Newt had been Speaker for 4 or 5 years, and it was not a really big vote. It was on an appropriations bill, and this was. This like one term after we were elected in '94, 2 terms after we were elected, and we had ratcheted down the spending across the board in our country, and we're on a good path to get the country back, to where we actually had a balanced budget. And the bill that came to the floor was an appropriations bill to fund our own offices, not our offices, but the appropriations offices, and the bill called for an increase in spending, like a 50% increase or something really ridiculous. And we just said, wait, we just reduced the spending of the committee, and now you're going to increase the spending on the committee? That doesn't make sense. That's not what we came to Washington to do. And so there was about 11 of us who voted against the rule on that appropriation spending bill, and it didn't pass. So there was sort of an emergency in the Republican caucus because, we had the members to vote out anything in the House, just like they do today, if you all hang together. But there were 11 of us who said, no, we're not going to vote for that because it's really going against the grain of what we came to Washington to do, and that's to, try to balance the budget. And so this came at a time when Newt was kind of in his nadir of leadership in the House, and he elected to have a conference of all Republicans in the House and do it that night, because this vote probably took place at 4 or 5 o'clock. And so that evening, he called a Republican conference down in, what is it, HC5? That's the room, yeah, HC5. And it was very unusual because we'd had a lot of meetings down there, a lot of meetings of our conference, but we'd never had a meeting where they actually sent the police to go get you if you didn't show up in the room. They did for this meeting. And we waited until every single member of the House of Representatives who was a Republican got to the room. And when you get that many members into that HC5, we had 225, 230, 240 members. It was crowded and it was hot, and a lot of us have been there a long time. But Newt got up in front of all of us and started just railing away about how, some of us think we're smarter than everybody else, and we got to stick together and move legislation and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I just want to challenge the 11 of you that voted against this rule to come and tell this conference why you voted against the rule. And so I knew I was the one that he was thinking about. And so I went right up to the front. I was the first one to the microphone. And I described to him a situation that I'd had in 1982. 1982, most of you probably weren't even born then, but 1982 was the first strike that the NFL had during my playing years. There was actually one back in the 70s, but 82 was a big strike, and it actually turned into not to a strike, but a lockout. And during the lockout, I had said, I don't feel like it's right for me to strike. I signed a contract with the Seattle Seahawks to play for X number of years, X number of dollars, and not a lot of dollars either, by the way. My first 3 years in the NFL, I made $28,000, $35,000, and $42,000. But I signed a contract. I signed a contract, and I said I'd play. And '82 was one of the years that I signed to play. And so I said, I don't feel like, because you've got a union, that I can break my word that I gave to the Seahawks that I would play, and so I can't strike. And I literally was called on the carpet by a guy who was employed by the union and a former player. And he came to that meeting, and he was standing up the front just like I'm doing right now, and he said, Largent, and I was right in the back of the room, he says, Largent, we have ways to deal with you, and we'll take care of you later. It was not a veiled threat that they had some big people to do bodily harm to me. And so I recounted that story. And so I told the speaker, I said, Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you in all honesty, I've been in smaller rooms than HC5 with bigger people that are in this room right now, and been threatened with physical harm. And so I would tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I came here with a commitment to the people who elected me to vote for legislation that put the government on a downward path of spending, not upward path. And so I can't help you on this vote. And and then there were several other guys after me who spoke, but it really kind of changed the spirit of the room, if you will, after I spoke, and people understood at least why I was doing what I was doing. But it was a tension-filled time, to say the least. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Switching gears a little bit, I wonder if you could talk about social media, Twitter, Facebook.
Yeah.
Where you see that going, affecting your constituents, really pay attention to that. I don't think media.
I heard a statistic just this week that said that kids under the age of 32, I think it might have been even primarily under 28, that they watch 10% of the television that people over that age watch today. That they're watching their iPhone, they're watching their iPad, they're getting information, programming, television, videos on their iPad and iPhones. They're not going to the television. So that highlights the importance of social media in the world to come. And I'm talking about in the very near term, if not right now. So that to me just underscores the importance, particularly for people in politics, of making sure you know how that world connects to your constituents. And, you know, like I said, over the age of 32, you can still reach them through, you know, television commercials or mail, you know. You can actually send mail to those people. But the people that are under 32, you can't touch them unless you're in social media, unless you're connecting with them where they're connecting. And they're not connecting through television. They're not connecting through newspapers. Most people under the age of 32 have never had a newspaper prescription or subscription. They've gotten it through their iPad. So it really calls for some different kind of thinking, and I see most of you are of that age, and so you're thinking this way, but it really does cause for, it calls for a different avenue of communication today than we have ever had in the past. And you know, I'm proud. I represent the wireless industry, and we're a piece of this new way you communicate. But I would tell you, if your boss is not communicating using social media, using access through the internet, then he's missing a significant portion of his constituents in not doing that, because it's so important today. And it's going to be, I see it accelerating not going the other direction.